I'm Mike Cope. I'm the Director of Ministry Outreach for Pepperdine University and an adjunct Bible professor at Abilene Christian University. And I'm visiting with my friend, the publisher of ACU Press, Dr. Leonard Allen. Leonard, I think something that interests people is where this came from. Can you talk a little bit about the beginning of Leafwood? I think this story is interesting because you're a theologian, you're a Bible professor, you're Dr. Leonard Allen, and yet, coming to find out, you had this entrepreneurial spirit inside that you got to exercise a little bit with the founding of Leafwood Publishing years ago.
Yeah, it's an unlikely story. I mean, who would have thought? I would have never thought that I would have done it. We were moving to California after, a decade and a half of teaching at ACU, and my wife was going to finish her PhD out there, and I was tagging along, and I didn't know for sure what I would do, and a mutual friend of ours who is an academic, good friend, had said, why don't you start publishing books? There was a niche that had some needs. We come from a particular heritage, the Churches of Christ, and I think we'd kind of gotten stuck as a movement or a denomination, and we needed some cutting-edge provocation. And so our friend said, why don't you go for it? And I was just maybe foolish enough or ignorant enough to say, okay.
I might as well be the one to do that.
Yeah, I have time.
What was the year?
The year was 2000.
Okay.
And
that was an interesting time in Churches of Christ. A lot of thinking about who we're going to be in light of our tradition and our heritage. But my recollection was there, as somebody who was doing a little bit of writing, there weren't a lot of options for where you could have a discussion like that. Who would publish it?
Where you could take some chances, say some things that were not the usual, and raise some new questions. And that's what Leafwood in the early days began to do. And it was, if I knew now what it would have involved starting that then, I probably wouldn't do it. That many things are that way.
Yeah. The beauty of not seeing the future.
This literally started in our garage in Orange, California, in Orange County, California, and it was a huge learning curve. Just the technology of publishing, all that's involved. Not to mention acquiring the manuscripts. And because of my scholarship and work as a professor for many years, I had a network, you could say, some capital to work with, people who knew me, trusted me, and who began to come to me with manuscript and ideas. And quickly we began to develop book projects that began to make an impact and began to actually sell more than I envisioned. And it kind of took off. And after about a year and a half of this, I was also doing part-time teaching at Biola University in LA County, and our little driveway in the front of our house in Orange, California had, at one time, I think, 4 totally full pallets of books sitting out on the open driveway. And it didn't rain much there, and I'd put a big tarp over each one when it did rain, and that was my storage for books.
That's kind of a humble beginning, but that's exciting. You made it work.
Yeah, we began to sell books and make an impact and attract attention and accomplish at least the initial objectives of starting Leafwood.
So bring us forward just a little bit. How did we get from Orange County, California, to ACU Press / Leafwood Publishing today?
Okay, yeah, good question. I had followed my wife to California saying it's your turn to pursue your career dreams, and she was getting a PhD and then began to search for a teaching position, and I had said, I'll follow you wherever you feel is the place for you, and it turns out Northwest Arkansas was that place, a small non-denominational Christian university. And so we moved there, and I took Leafwood with me and began, just kept building it. And then at one point, I think the year was 2005 or 6, someone from ACU approached me. They saw the success of Leafwood, they saw what it was doing, and frankly, ACU Press was not flourishing at that time, shall I say. And there was talk, discussion, negotiation, and to make a long story short, Leafwood was folded into Abilene Christian University Press, and under the condition that I would become the new director of both entities, the press.
The market's pretty crowded out there. There are a lot of people who are trying to elbow their way into the book-selling market. So how do you do that? How do you, especially since Leafwood Publishers has gone way beyond its beginnings as a conversation piece for Churches of Christ. You're in a much larger discussion right now, much larger context. So how do you find a piece of that? How do you compete?
Well, it's a big challenge, and I've worked for years now, over a decade now, learning the ropes and how to do that. And a little over 3 years ago, ACU Press and Leafwood Publishers made a significant decision and move in that direction. We hired 2 professionals, highly experienced professionals from the Christian book publishing industry. In fact, they were from Simon & Schuster, and they had both knowledge and relationships and experience getting books into all the channels of the book trade. And so we took a big step, a big risk, and hired these 2 men who have joined us and are still working with us, and doors began to open. And we are now, many of our, especially our Leafwood titles, are in wherever books are sold, including Sam's Club, Costco, Books A Million, all those channels. So as a result, whereas much of the publishing world was contracting over these last 3 years, in some serious cases, and bookstores are closing, and of course Borders bankruptcy was a big watershed, our sales have more than doubled in these last 3 years. So I'm not saying we're not facing the same pressures, we just had more room to grow, and we've worked hard to do that.
Well, I know, Leonard, I had a book inside of me for a decade that I tried to get out, and it just wouldn't come out. A book about my daughter, about her death, her life before that, a mentally disabled child. And you came to me one day and said, it's time for that book to come out. And we talked about it, we etched it, and then finally I wrote the book. And you and some other readers read it and said, nice book, but it's antiseptic. It feels like you wrote it from arm's length. And I remember you saying to me, unfortunately, you've got to go back into the pain if you're going to write this book to really help people. And I got to looking at it and realized that's exactly what I'd done. I didn't want to go there.
And so what did you do at that point?
So I went back and I dug out all my old journals, and I read from those darkest days. And then I went and asked Diane if I could read her journals, and I read my wife's journals and talked to my family members. And so at that point I went back in, rewrote the book, and it became a very different book.
Yeah, I remember those days and weeks, and how what a tough journey that was to go back and revisit. And
but then it goes out as a book that's more likely to help people who've actually suffered loss. And
you share with me stories of people who've read the book and have written you in tears and gratitude, and deeply identifying with what you went through with Megan.
Well, part of what struck me as we went through there was you've got lots of books in process. You and your staff, you're working on a lot of books at the time, and so it's not like everything shuts down to help me get my book out. You're doing that with a lot of authors.
It's intense. It's challenging. It's intense. It's often gratifying to see to have a role in helping something be born, something come to life that is truthful, is powerful, and can change people's lives who read it. And that Megan's Secrets that resulted has done that, is doing that.